You do it.
Performing an assessment is like conducting a research project. We start with a question about the child's functional performance. We generate hypotheses. We gather information. We refine the hypothesis. And we derive conclusions about the child's difficulties from the information that was collected. We choose a variety of methods to collect the information that will help us most to understand the child, and so that intervention is guided by informed clinical reasoning. Today, we will focus on the assessment of sensory integration dysfunction through what Jean Ayers referred to as clinical observations. These clinical observations include observations of the child's performance in tasks that have been structured by the examiner, as well as observations of the child in activities that are not structured by the therapist, but still provide important information about the child. I will group the observations according to specific areas of assessment. However, in an actual clinical situation, we do not administer these observations in a pre-established order. Rather, using our clinical reasoning skills,
Can you do this?
we move from one observation to the next, assessing the child in a natural flow of activity,
Wow! Perfect! You did a good job.
observing the child's responses to the environment.
Putting my arms out like this.
Now, let's turn to how we actually collect the data. We start learning about the child as soon as he comes in.
Okay.
For example, we can observe the child's level of arousal, his postural control, his organization of behavior, and his motor planning abilities as he prepares to transition into the observation setting.
Can you take your socks off? And you are in what
With this
grade?
child, we will start our structured observations with forearm alternating movements.
You're going to do the same thing I do, okay? So can you do this?
Forearm alternating movement is the ability to copy the examiner in rapid, repetitive forearm
Can
rotation.
you do it one more time by yourself?
Forearm alternating movement, additionally, has been considered a test of cerebellum function
Good job. Can you do it with your other hand?
and is considered an indicator of motor planning, sequencing, and processing some aspects of somatosensory input. The examiner observes a child's fluidity of movement.
Can you do it with both hands together?
Since 2 to 4 movements in 10 seconds is considered average for children in kindergarten, we observe the number of rotations as well as the smoothness of the rotations as the child alternates supination and pronation.
Okay. Good job.
Sequential finger touching is the ability to sequentially oppose the thumb to all other fingers.
You do it.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3.
And can you do it with your other hand?
We also ask the child to do the task with each hand to see if there is a difference in performance between the right and the left side.
Good job. Can you do it like this?
We will observe to see if the child can move the fingers independently of the rest of the hand and upper extremity. Here, we can also observe smoothness of movement, timing, and sequencing of the action. Finger to nose.
And then I'm going like this. Can you do that?
Finger to nose is the ability to copy the examiner in the action of bringing an extended index finger
Okay.
to the
And with
tip
your
of
other
the
hand?
nose without looking.
Okay.
In a sensory integration framework, this task is considered a measure of cerebellar
Can you
integrity
do that?
as well as an assessment of the ability to process somatosensory input.
Okie dokie. Whoop, boom.
Most 5-year-olds can be expected to touch within 1 centimeter
and
of
the
the
other
tip of
hand?
their nose without looking.
Okay.
We are looking for accuracy as well as smoothness and fluidity of the
Very
movement.
good. Okay.
We can also observe if a child self-corrects. Self-correction tells us something about how the child uses sensory feedback. Eye movements. The examiner asks the child to visually focus on a target, and then the examiner moves the target horizontally and vertically. In this task, the examiner observes if the child has the ability to focus and maintain a stable visual field while the child moves her head from side to side. We observe whether or not the child can move her eyes and head independently, the smoothness of her eye movements during tracking, and how well her eyes move together. Schilder's arm extension test. You stand like this and you put your arms to the front like this, okay? And you stand there and you close your eyes, but you leave your arms out there. Good job. Can I move your head now? We observe the child's ability to maintain her arms in the forward position with eyes closed. Wow, are you good or are you good? Good job. Keep your arms up. Okay. We can passively move the child's head to observe her ability to stabilize her arms and trunk while I move her head. This has been hypothesized to be related to proprioceptive processing as well as cerebellar functions. Keep them up. Since most 5-year-olds are able to maintain their arms in position with their eyes closed, we will observe how well the child can keep his arms elevated, if the head can be moved without the arms moving,
Are your arms up?
if there is a tremor of the hands or fingers, and if there is any difference between the right and left upper extremity in maintaining the position.
Okay.
Anti-gravity flexion and supine flexion. Supine flexion is a simultaneous flexion against gravity of the knees, hips, trunk, and neck from the supine lying position with the top of the head approximating the knees. Good job. I want you to bring it down and come up again all together. We can observe the quality of joint contraction and the length of time that the child can maintain the flexed position.
7.
In sensory integration theory, the flexo pattern has been associated with the somatosensory system, and performance on this observation may be related to tactile and proprioceptive discrimination as well as motor planning.
20, 21.
With an older child, we can also see if the child can maintain the position when resistance is applied to the head and the knees.
Excellent.
Flexion against gravity can also be observed in unstructured tasks that require the child to lift the legs against gravity, such as holding on and swinging from a trapeze. The prone extension observations assess the child's ability to simultaneously lift the head, arms, upper trunk, and legs against gravity from the prone lying position.
Now all the way up, and wait a second. I want your thighs up. Very good.
The upper torso and thighs should come off the ground.
3, 4.
We are observing the length of time that the child can maintain the position as well as the amount of effort required to do so.
10. Good job.
We can also note if the child can sustain the extension with the entire body. For example, some children can lift their upper torso but let their thighs touch the mat, or they bend their knees and lift only their lower legs. In sensory integration theory, the ability to extend against gravity is associated with vestibular functions and is often considered in conjunction with other measures of vestibular processing. Dynamic postural control.
Can you put your arms up? All the way up.
Postural control includes the ability to regulate the body's position in space for the dual purposes of stability and orientation. In reference to sensory processing, these reactions are related primarily to visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive functions. Dynamic postural reactions are part of postural control. They occur in response to an externally imposed force, such as moving the surface where the child is sitting. In that case, we talk about reactive postural control.
And I will help you here.
Or dynamic postural reactions may occur in response to self-initiated movements, such as reaching for a toy or catching a ball. In that case, we talk about anticipatory postural control. Forward protective reactions are tested by quickly moving the child forward to the floor. Here we are assessing the integrity of an early developing reaction that provides a protective function. The speed and effectiveness of the child's ability to bring his arms out in a protective motion is noted. Weight-bearing and proximal joint stability can be observed by having the child bear weight on his hands or by doing wheelbarrow walking.
Here we go.
We observe for winging of the scapula, locking of the elbows, and/or lordosis of the trunk. In sensory integration theory, poor proximal joint stability in the shoulder girdle and neck area has been associated with poor vestibular and proprioceptive processing. Gravitational insecurity. When I put a child on the ball, I'm sensitive to any signs of discomfort. I suspect gravitational insecurity if he becomes anxious by having his feet off the ground. I will look for signs of gravitational insecurity by asking the child to tilt back on the ball and see if he's able to do so without apprehension. I observe postural control when I move the ball from side to side and see his adjustments. I then assess processing of proprioceptive input in his response to handling and observe protective reactions when I put him in prone and move the ball forward very fast. Finally, I look at bilateral motor coordination and proximal joint stability when he walks on his hands. So, in 30 seconds, I have accomplished at least 5 or 6 observations. Projected action sequences and bilateral motor coordination. In these tasks, we observe the child's ability to formulate a goal and a plan of action before movement is initiated. By providing the child with an opportunity to swing, we can observe processing of vestibular input, as well as the ability to use anticipatory postural control and projected action sequences.
Okay, and put them in there.
When we observe this child on the platform swing, we can see unconscious awareness of body position or the need to make compensatory postural adjustments. This is dependent on the integration of vestibular and proprioceptive input. Another unstructured activity that lends itself to observing projected action sequences is catching a ball. We can observe the child's ability to use feed-forward mechanisms when catching the ball. I'm avoiding throwing the ball directly into his hands so I can observe his ability to anticipate where he positions his hands in space. We can also observe his timing and coordination of both sides of his body in this task. Skipping is another task that gives us a chance to observe fluidity of movement and bilateral motor coordination. Jumping jacks are also an example of a structured task that allows observation of these abilities. We observe for timing, sequencing, reciprocal, and bilateral actions. Tactile play and response to tactile input can be evaluated by exposing the child to a variety of tactile experiences, both with and without vision as part of the activity.
Okay, can we do it with your eyes closed? Okay. Where did I touch you?
Here.
Okay. Where did I touch you now?
Here.
Where did I touch you?
During tactile play, we can observe tactile discrimination as well as hyper and hyporesponsivity that may indicate a tactile modulation disorder. During an assessment, we also provide the child with an opportunity to play freely.
Now you can choose whatever you want to do. What would you like to do? Whatever you want to do, you can choose.
We may ask the child to choose an activity or piece of equipment. Play preferences provide information about the child's intrinsic motivation and sensory preferences. The choices that the child makes provide us with information about ideation, sensory needs, and motor and social skills. Here, we can observe that one child is choosing to go on the roller racer and another one is choosing to build. During the construction, we can observe motor planning and constructional skills, as well as ideation. When the child is on the roller racer, we can observe bilateral motor coordination and motor planning. Now we will meet Matthew. Matthew is 6 years old and he was referred for intervention because of gross motor problems. The initial question generally is, why is this child here? And when we are focusing on sensory processing, one of the things we ask is, what are the sensory processing deficits that this child has that relate to his functional problems?
How many chocolate chip cookies you ate?
1.
Okay, and what's your name?
Matthew.
And how old are you?
6.
And I'm Erna.
As I introduce myself to Matthew, I notice that he's leaning back on the bolster behind him. Leaning back may indicate a need for proprioceptive input or inefficient postural control.
We are going to be. Did your mom tell you what you were going to do here today?
I'm also looking at his muscle tone and joint laxity.
Be tight.
I'm already realizing that maybe he has low tone.
What we are going to do is I'm going to.
Now I'm giving him a choice of who will be in charge.
Where would you like to start? Me being the boss or you being the boss?
Why with you?
I'm being the boss.
We will begin by observing forearm alternating movements.
Here. Can you do this?
Matthew is definitely having difficulties in this area. He is very uncoordinated in the way that he's doing the movements. And he has some associated movements of the shoulders as well.
Hands like this.
I'm already forming an initial hypothesis. Matthew may have deficits in processing proprioceptive input based on his low muscle tone and inefficient alternating forearm movements. Sequential finger touching.
Okay, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you come back.
1, 2, 2.
Matthew is taking a long time and is looking at his hands as he performs the task.
4.
Okay, can you do it with your other hand?
1, 2, 3.
The fluidity of his movement is
And
poor.
back.
This may suggest again a deficit in processing proprioceptive
3,
input.
4.
And can you come back and forth?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Finger to nose.
Okay, now look what I'm doing.
He comes somewhat close, but it is borderline. I will not assume anything from this observation right now, but will keep his performance in mind as I continue to observe him. Eye movements. Matthew can follow the movement of the object with his head and eyes. However, when I'm asking him to maintain a stable visual field while his head is moving, his performance is not that good.
Okay, now look at the rose and look at me. Look at the rose. Look at the rose. Look at me. At me.
What is interesting in this observation is that while I am explaining it to him and I was moving my head from side to side, he was able to do it almost automatically. When he tried to do it actively, he failed. This makes me think that he may have more of a motor planning problem, and that is the reason he cannot do it when conscious awareness is brought into the task.
Okay. Okay.
He's definitely having trouble maintaining a stable visual field when he's moving his head up and down or from side to side. The ability to maintain a stable visual field can be related to processing of vestibular and proprioceptive input. Schilder's arm extension test.
Yeah, keep them like this, okay, like this, okay. Okay. Now what I'm going to ask you again
In
is
this
now to
test,
keep your hands
both
down.
legs need to be closer together. However, I asked him to separate them slightly because when he had them together and his eyes were closed, he almost lost his balance.
And close your eyes.
The ability to maintain his balance with eyes closed can be related to vestibular and proprioceptive processing, which is another observation I can make at this time.
I mean, not around, okay, side to side, okay? I won't do this, okay? Okay, keep your, there.
Watch the way that his arms go down when he closes his eyes and I move his head.
Keep your arms
But
up. What I'm
when I
doing
ask
is-
him if the arms are going down, he
Yeah,
repositions.
you're doing great.
This makes me think that his unconscious awareness of position is less than optimal.
Okay, your
He's
arms
also having difficulty separating the movements of his head from his upper extremities. This may be indicative of poor processing of proprioceptive input. Supine flexion.
Your shoulders and your legs at the same time.
Matthew is able to assume the position,
Perfect. Can you keep it there? Very good.
but the
Okay,
quality of the flexion against gravity is not very good.
5, 6.
Still, he has maintained the position for approximately 10 seconds, which is within the norm or borderline for children his
This time I'm
age.
going to push down, okay? 1, 2, 3. Here, you put them like this. 1, 2, 3, go. Up. 1, 2. There we go. Okay. Now, what I want you to do now is to turn around on your stomach and bring up your arms and your legs up at the same time, okay? And your thighs need to be off the ground, okay?
Prone extension.
Keep it up. 1.
We can see right away that Matthew has poor quality and he does not bring his thighs off the ground. As time goes by, the position gets worse.
Should we do it one more time?
Poor extension against gravity can be related to vestibular proprioceptive processing. So I'm starting to have concerns about this area of function.
Great, perfect. Okay.
Bilateral motor coordination. Matthew definitely does not have good coordination, and his performance is below age expectations.
Something else. Can you skip like this?
When he tries skipping, he has poor fluidity of the movements, and he has poor bilateral motor coordination.
Very good. And now what I'm going to do is I want to play ball with you.
I'm now refining my hypothesis about this child. I'm wondering if this child has difficulty processing vestibular proprioceptive input because he exhibits poor extension against gravity, poor postural control, poorly dissociated movements, and difficulty performing jumping jacks and skipping. I'm now going to look at projected action sequences.
You catch? Okay.
He has difficulty catching the ball.
Very good. Catch. Very good.
He does not appear to anticipate his movements in relation to the position of the ball, and he has missed it consistently.
Okay. Can you kick?
Projected action sequences can be related to vestibular and proprioceptive processing.
And let me kick. And you kick. Very good. Excellent. Okay. What I want you to do is to turn around and put the feet to the front.
Observe Matthew's performance on the platform swing. It
Okay.
suggests poor postural control.
And you're going to throw it in here.
Matthew tends to overshoot when he's throwing the beanbags into the bucket. His timing is not so much off, but he tends to overshoot when he extends the arm and releases the object.
Oh, we do have that. Okay, here we go. Can you pump?
Here we can see
Can you do it with
that
holding on?
Matthew
With my
is also not able to pump the swing symmetrically, suggesting poor bilateral motor coordination. He is also exhibiting some associated reactions in the lower extremities.
Okay, wait a second. Okay. Yeah, let's hold on to those. You know something, maybe you can cross.
I
your legs
decide
like
to
this.
place him in a
Hold the
cross-legged
feet,
position
hold the
to
ropes.
give him a
Okay,
wider
wait a
base of
minute.
support.
Okay.
His performance may be related to poor ability to produce projected action sequences.
Okay.
The helicopter swing requires a different type of skill. Here we can observe Matthew's anti-gravity flexion, proximal joint stability, and reaction to intense vestibular import.
You want to stop and go in the other direction?
I'm not concerned
let's
with
put your feet
Matthew's
down.
flexion in this swing. I don't see any signs
the
of
other
poor
way.
flexion against gravity,
Okay.
but I do see signs of poor proximal joint stability when he's holding on to the rope.
This way, let's go that way. Okay, so run, and pick up your feet. There we go.
Watch the way Matthew gets off the swing. I'm wondering if he does it that way in order to avoid the postural control that is necessary to get off the swing in an upright position.
You are done with the helicopter. Okay, I had the feeling.
Dynamic postural control.
We're going to sit on the ball.
Matthew tends to use riding reactions to maintain his position on the ball.
Straight, there we go.
His postural control is poor because he's leaning on the ball rather than regaining his center of
Back on the ball and
gravity.
touch the floor with your hands.
However, Matthew exhibits no signs of gravitational insecurity. Weight bearing and proximal joint stability. I'm also looking at the position of the
Ready,
scapula.
set, go.
They are slightly abducted, suggesting poor proximal joint stability at the level of the shoulder girdle
We
area.
go back.
Scapular winging is suggestive of poor extensor tone and poor processing of vestibular input. Tactile play and response to tactile input.
Okay, you now close your eyes and you don't see. Where did I touch you?
Um,
Show me with your finger. Okay, where did I touch you?
Poor localization may indicate poor tactile discrimination and may or may not be associated
Close
with
eye.
hyperresponsivity or
Close your
tactile defensiveness. Matthew is able to grossly identify where he's being touched, and he has no difficulty tolerating me touching him. If you see him withdraw, it may indicate tactile defensiveness or a tactile
Okay,
modulation
perfect. You wanna
disorder.
choose? You want to be the boss?
yeah.
Okay, what would you like to do?
Can I put my shirt back on?
Okay, and the other
Matthew has chosen
Right
to play
across.
with shaving cream.
Okay.
In
Okay.
this task,
You can start
we can
this
also
time.
observe his reactions to light touch, as well as his ability to
Okay.
shape letters and figures. We can see a little incoordination when he writes the
Okay.
letter
And
on
I'm
top of
going
the
to
mat.
put
However, he forms that letter
here.
appropriately. Matthew stays with the
Right.
task for an
Where's my
extended period of time. He actually appears to enjoy the tactile
Okay,
input.
let's do one more, okay?
Tactile 3 in a row.
Oh,
In this
yes, you
activity,
did.
he
Okay,
shows
but
no
let's make
signs of
one
tactile
more,
defensiveness.
One more, the last one. And I am going to make now the tic-tac-toe. Okay, so
Matthew's clinical observations have revealed a vestibular proprioceptive processing deficit that seems to be affecting postural control, proximal joint stability, bilateral motor coordination, the ability to project actions in time and space, and the ability to maintain a stable visual field. His functional problems in the gross motor area are likely to be related to these sensory processing deficits. Because Matthew did not have much difficulty with tactile perception and imitation, somatodyspraxia is not being considered at this point. The sensory integration and praxis test provided added information about the extent of these difficulties. Initially, Matthew also had sensory modulation issues as a presenting problem, but this had improved by the time of these observations. In order to fully understand a child who is having difficulties, we need to observe typically developing children and familiarize ourselves with the literature. This will enhance our ability to choose appropriate assessment tools and interpret the information we derive from them in relationship to the child we are assessing. More in-depth interpretation of these clinical observations will be discussed in part 2 of this series. We will revisit Matthew and compare his performance to another child with sensory integrative dysfunction. Observations provide the context for understanding a child and help us as therapists to plan and implement interventions that will support and enhance a child's development. You do it. Assessments of sensory integration within a comprehensive evaluation can be accomplished observing a child in structured and unstructured situations or through what Jean Ayers called clinical observations. In part 1 of this series, we observed the performance of typically developing children, and then we met Matthew. His performance on these observations provided clear and detailed information about his difficulties with sensory integration and praxis. In this tape, we further interpret Matthew's performance and compare him with another child, Jesse, to illustrate the clinical reasoning used in formulating hypotheses about the nature of their difficulties. This interpretation involves skilled analysis and requires knowledge of typical and atypical development and sensory integration theory. Notice that the order of the observations and the way we collect the information is somewhat different for each child. Each child who is referred to therapy has different functional deficits. Therefore, the observations are specifically chosen according to the needs and referring problems of the individual child. The therapist's choice of observations and the flow of observations develops as the interaction between the therapist and the child progresses. This is Jessie.
With my next birthday, I'll be 6.
Jessie is 5 years and 9 months old. Jessie was first referred for an occupational therapy evaluation at age 3 because he had deficits in self-regulation, motor coordination, social interaction, and activities of daily living. He has received occupational therapy services and has made significant progress. I often start by asking the child to choose an activity. This provides me with information on ideation and sensory preferences. Jessie chose to use the trapeze. When I'm looking at his shoulders, I see that his proximal joint stability is not that good, but I'm not going to form a conclusion at this point. I observe that his trunk flexion against gravity is less than optimal. Although his lower extremities are flexed, the flexor control of his trunk is inadequate. At this point, I wonder if he needs to hold on to the trapeze in order to provide himself with added proprioceptive input, either to get a better sense of his body or to calm himself because he might be anxious.
Can you do something for me?
I wanted to take this opportunity to observe Jessie's ability to perform some structured tasks. Forearm alternating movements will provide information about proprioceptive processing and rhythmic sequential movements. I observe that Jessie is not focusing on the task. I wonder if this is because this task is difficult for him. He seems to have another activity in mind, so I let him decide what we will do next. He chooses a tactile activity that does not require much motor skill. The gag has some buttons in it. I can now observe how well he can use his sense of touch to discriminate shapes and tolerate the textures.
Have you done this before?
Nope.
No.
I found another one in.
I observe that the gag is on his leg. It doesn't seem to bother him for a long time until he picks at it.
Okay.
I wonder if he registered it. He's finding the buttons. This is telling me that his tactile discrimination is not that bad.
I like green one.
A green one. How many buttons do we have now?
I'll count. 1.
I also see him wiping his hands. And this makes me suspicious that he may have difficulty modulating this sensation.
You want it back or should we put it away?
I use the opportunity as he's playing with the gag to have him do sequential finger touching.
Let me ask you to do something before we do this. Can you do this? Look at me. Can you do this?
Yeah.
His finger touching is not sequential, but he's not quite 6 years old, so I'm careful about interpreting his performance.
Wow. You want to do that now?
As you saw, the way I did it was not in the most standardized way.
Wow.
However, I prefer to do it that way rather than to avoid it completely.
You want to do pie in the face?
Pie in the face.
I am now wondering about his practicabilities.
You have to make a face first.
But it's not pie on my face, is it?
He's somewhat disorganized in the way he's playing with the shaving cream. He's starting to wipe the shaving cream off his hands and onto the mat.
Then what do? You make a face here? You will have to tell me how to play pie in the face.
Oh no, my shirt, my pants.
Oops, we got it all over?
I can see that he's starting to worry about the shaving cream on his clothing and on his arms.
Okay, should we clean it up?
His mom is going to help him clean it off because he's getting somewhat anxious about the shaving cream on his clothes and on his body.
Sure is all covered with foam.
This indicates that maybe this child has a tactile modulation deficit.
I want to change.
I now wonder why he chose to play with the shaving cream and the gag when he's so concerned about being dirty and having it on him.
How's that? Is that
You
better?
have to clean that.
We know that this child has a history of hyperresponsiveness to many sensory experiences and has had intervention in the past. So one of my hypotheses is that this child prefers these familiar tactile games to unfamiliar motor activities. Still, I'm suspicious that he cannot adequately modulate the tactile sensation.
Oh, you're doing a great job. You are.
Look at the way he's being hugged by his mom and how he pushes away when she holds the hug a little bit too long.
Okay. Would you bring this one? Pull it.
Now I asked Jesse to help me move the equipment around the clinic. Again, I observed that his proximal joint stability is not that good.
Ooh, you have big muscles.
This is an example of observing the child's ability during an unstructured activity. So far, I have seen some evidence of sensory modulation problems. This child also appears to have low muscle tone and poor proximal joint stability, and might also have a proprioceptive processing deficit.
Bring that one over here. Over here. Okay, is it even? No, it doesn't.
Jesse's ability to climb on the swing is not that bad. Therefore, I'm not yet sure about his motor planning skills.
Okay.
The swing will provide an opportunity to observe his interactions with vestibular input, his ability to motor plan, his ability to project actions in time and space, his proximal joint stability, and his postural control.
Okay, can you put your feet to the front? Yeah, like this, like if you were driving a car and you put your feet to the front. Perfect, perfect.
He's not pumping the swing and he looks a little unstable on it. This makes me wonder if he has postural control problems or if he feels uncomfortable with the movement.
Okay. Whoa, good. Okay.
Jesse has missed the bucket a number of times. This suggests that his ability to anticipate and plan his actions in time and space is not that good.
Almost.
He's not really focusing and anticipating the actions. This adds to my questions about his motor planning skills.
Excellent. And the last one? You did.
Now, I asked Jesse to go back in space so that I can look at his relationship to gravity. We can look at gravitational security in many different ways, and this is one of them. We see that Jesse does not have any hesitation in going backwards, so he does not show signs of gravitational insecurity in this activity.
Okay.
While I have Jesse on the mat, I will look at his supine flexion. Flexion against gravity is often poor in children who have difficulty with motor planning. I asked Jesse to simultaneously bring up his head, lower extremities, and trunk against gravity. He has difficulty doing this. Therefore, I help him to assume the position, hoping that if he could hold it, I can still look at his flexion against gravity.
Here we go. And hold. Wait. Hold it, okay?
When I bring him into the position, he can hold it for 2 or 3 seconds. However, he cannot assume the position by himself.
3.
Jesse's flexion against gravity is
Look
borderline.
at me. Can you do this?
Now we will look at Jesse's prone extension. Assuming the prone extension position can be related to motor planning, while sustaining this posture is commonly associated with vestibular proprioceptive processing.
Hold it.
A child this age should be able to assume the position by himself and maintain it for a few seconds. He's not able to do this, so I question his vestibular proprioceptive processing abilities.
Now, look at me. Can you do this? I'm putting my arms
To
out.
further observe how he processes proprioceptive sensations, I will look at Jesse's slow ramp movements.
Slowly to my shoulder. Okay, you do it at the same time I am doing it, okay? So look, bring them here now. I'm bringing them slow.
Jessie has jerky movements and is not really going at the same time as I am moving.
Okay, should we do it one more time?
This further confirms my initial hypothesis that this child has deficits in processing proprioceptive information.
1, 2, 3, go. Let's start at the same time and we go slowly. Okay, and then we go out. Wait.
Finger touching is another test that will tell us something about processing proprioceptive information.
Finger out like this, and I'm going.
A child this age should point to within 1 centimeter of the tip of his nose or correct himself to do this.
Okay.
Jessie is not doing this. It is interesting that he's making faces. I wonder if this is related to him touching his face. This is more data to support my initial hypothesis that this child might have a deficit in proprioceptive processing and some tactile modulation deficits. I decide to put Jessie on the ball to look at proprioceptive and vestibular processing. This will give me another opportunity to see if he exhibits any signs of gravitational insecurity. At the same time, I will observe his postural control and his ability to process proprioceptive input. He is actively bouncing on the ball, which tells me something about his desire to seek vestibular and proprioceptive input. But when I passively move him backwards, he holds on to me. His apprehension makes me wonder if he is gravitationally insecure.
Huh? Now, can I ask you to go back on the ball?
Yeah.
Like put your head all the way
I
back
haven't
and
seen
put your
any
arm-
other signs,
Look like this.
but I do see him holding on in a somewhat apprehensive way. I wonder why he's anxious. Is it because I'm controlling his movements, because he has poor postural control, or is it because he's insecure with going backwards when he can't see where he's going?
And put your hands back like this. Can you get up again?
He's able to bring himself up, showing me that his postural control is relatively good in comparison to his apprehension of going back in
Wait.
space.
Let's do one more thing. I'm going to put you on the stomach, and you're going to walk on your hands.
I observe that he almost avoids putting his hands down on the mat. He may have poor protective reactions, or he may be avoiding the muscle contraction required to support his body weight, or he may be avoiding the tactile sensation on his hands.
Okay? Can I ask you to take your shirt off?
Taking off the child's shirt gives me a chance to look at his scapular position. But Jessie didn't want to take his shirt off, so I did not push it. Jessie chose to go on the helicopter swing. This is the perfect opportunity for me to gather more information about vestibular proprioceptive processing.
Put your feet down.
In this situation, I observe that Jessie has poor flexion against gravity, again primarily in the head position.
Where is your head?
His head is going back in space, and I'm thinking that he either has poor proximal joint stability or a desire to seek more sensory input.
Okay. Enough. Feet down.
If a child is throwing his head back while he's moving on the helicopter, gravitational insecurity is probably not a major concern.
Okay. Keep head up.
When Jessie gets off the helicopter, he's able to transfer his weight to one foot and take the hoops off his leg without much difficulty. His postural control on one foot is not that bad.
Okay. And close your eyes. Can you do that?
I go on to the Childers arm extension test to gather more information about vestibular proprioceptive processing.
Okay.
He does not sustain the proximal joint stability in his shoulders. When I turn his head, I can see that he moves his head and his trunk together as a unit, rather than turning his head and stabilizing the rest of his body. His difficulties here further suggest proprioceptive processing deficits. Now we will look at motor planning, bilateral motor coordination, and projecting actions in time and space.
Good job.
Jesse
Okay.
cannot do
Now,
jumping
can you do
jacks
this?
well.
Skip like this.
Jesse also has trouble skipping.
Like this.
He definitely has difficulty in the fluidity of the movement. Jesse appears to have difficulty with proprioceptive processing, bilateral motor coordination, and motor planning.
By catch.
To further assess projecting actions in time and space, I will observe Jesse's ability to interact with a moving object.
Sorry.
A ball is perfect for this.
Good job.
I'm not sure I can form a clear conclusion here, because he did catch the ball on several occasions. However, I can make an assumption about his ability to project actions in time and space based on his performance on the swing when he was throwing beanbags into a bucket.
Can we kick?
Yeah.
When we are looking at him kicking, we also see that he rubs his leg every time he kicks. Once again, leading us to question his response to the tactile input from the ball. Here we see that Jesse definitely has difficulty maintaining his visual focus when he's catching and throwing the ball.
Whoops.
So we will look at ocular motor control.
Where is the rose? Okay, keep your eyes on the rose.
Jesse has decided that he's going to hold on to the object that I want him to track. And he's not going to let me do this in a very structured way. This tells me
Okay,
that this
weiter.
task is quite
Okay, now look what
difficult
I'm
for
doing
him.
now, okay? Look at the rose. Look at me. Look at me. Look at the rose. Look at me.
I wonder if he wants to control the stimulus because it requires less motor
Where
planning.
am I?
Remember,
Over here.
Jesse
Okay, what
has
I'm going
shown
to
some
do now
anxiety
is, look, when I
before.
hold this here. You're going to look at the rose and you're going to move your head, but keep your eyes on the rose, okay? Can you do that? You keep your eyes on the rose.
My turn.
Okay, you can.
So I don't need to push the issue and bring him to tears.
Arm.
Okay, put your finger exactly where I touched you, okay? Where did I touch you?
Now, I want to know more about his tactile abilities since they are related to his ability to motor plan and perform other skilled tasks.
Okay, you peeking?
I can get an idea about Jesse's tactile localization by touching his arms and asking him to let me know where he was touched. Jesse is not giving me a very refined response. He tends to tap where he was touched and continues tapping. I'm wondering if he's providing himself deep pressure in order to modulate the tactile sensations that I'm giving him, or if he really has poor awareness of where he's being touched. It is difficult to gain precise information about tactile discrimination without standardized testing, such as the sensory integration and praxis tests. However, I am certain at this point that he has some difficulties with tactile modulation.
You can choose one of these things. One little piece and eat one little piece. Just one.
One of the reasons for referral was that Jesse was eating very few different kinds of food.
Bread. Let's do a piece of bread like this. Just a little bite, tiny bit, okay? And I eat a piece, and you eat a piece.
When I asked him if he wanted to eat a snack, he almost burst into tears.
You're going to tell me you don't eat any food? That's okay, you don't need to eat it.
We can relate the difficulties that he has to modulation deficits, temperament, or learned behaviors.
I only like ice cream.
This would need to be further explored.
Okay, that's okay. Can I eat your food then? Okay, that's okay. Thank you.
Now we will go back to look at Matthew. Remember, Matthew is 6 years old and was referred to occupational therapy because of poor gross motor skills. We will compare our observations of Jesse's and Matthew's performance. When I placed Jesse on the ball, I observed that his postural control was pretty good. He was able to maintain his balance as I moved the ball around. When we compare his performance to Matthew's, we see that Matthew has much more difficulty maintaining a stable vertical position. When I ask them to go back on the ball, Matthew does so readily, while Jesse clings to my arms. This is one reason I hypothesized Jesse's gravitational insecurity. However, because I did not see signs of gravitational insecurity in other situations, I conclude that this is not a significant area of concern for Jesse. When they sit up, we see that Jesse has adequate postural control, while Matthew needs to use his hands to maintain the position. When I check their protective reactions, we see that Matthew's reactions are not optimal. He's slow to move his hands into position. Jesse has similar struggles, which makes me think both children have difficulty processing proprioceptive input. The helicopter swing provides another opportunity to observe differences between Jesse and Matthew. Matthew tends to enjoy the vestibular input and can stay there for longer periods of time than Jesse. I am not concerned with Matthew's flexion on the swing. I don't see any signs of poor flexion against gravity, but I do see signs of poor proximal joint stability when he's holding on to the rope. Jesse, on the other hand, exhibits poor flexion against gravity in that his head is back. However, he is tolerating the movement. Watch how Matthew gets off the swing. He throws himself backwards rather than use the postural control required to get off the swing. We can see that Matthew's balance is poor as he attempts to get out of the helicopter. Jesse is able to maintain an upright position and to balance on one foot to get out of the swing. When I observe Jesse's and Matthew's reactions to touch, we can see distinct differences in their performances. Matthew localizes the touch, goes directly to the point where he has been touched, and doesn't fool around with it. Jesse, on the other hand, hits that point and pats it over and over, maybe in an attempt to modulate the input. When we compare the children during tactile play, we again observe distinct differences in their needs and abilities. Jesse is disorganized in his play, and he seems somewhat concerned with the tactile input he's getting from the foam. He spends a lot of time trying to wipe his hands. Matthew is able to focus on the task and, in fact, seems to enjoy the tactile input. He can form letters and shapes and is able to participate in a structured game. Jesse, on the other hand, needs to be directed in order to stay on the task. And he continues to be distracted by the sensation of the foam on his skin and clothing. This is one of the reasons I conclude that he's still showing some signs of difficulty with tactile modulation. Matthew's performance in this task indicates no signs of tactile defensiveness. Let's summarize our interpretations. Matthew's clinical observations have revealed a vestibular proprioceptive processing deficit that seems to be affecting postural control, proximal joint stability, bilateral motor coordination, the ability to project actions in time and space, and the ability to maintain a stable visual field. His functional problems in the gross motor area are likely to be related to these sensory processing deficits. Because Matthew did not have much difficulty with tactile perception and imitation, somatodyspraxia is not being considered at this point. The sensory integration and praxis test provided added information about the extent of these difficulties. Initially, Matthew also had sensory modulation issues as a presenting problem, but this had improved by the time of these observations. Jesse's clinical observations revealed that he continues to show some signs of modulation deficits. He also exhibits signs of poor motor planning skills that may be related to inefficient tactile discrimination. The sensory integration and praxis tests later provided precise information confirming these hypotheses. In this two-part series, we have learned how the use of structured and unstructured observations provide critical information within the overall assessment of sensory integrative function and dysfunction. We have seen how hypotheses are formed and tested, and how observations are interpreted to form conclusions. Continued practice in developing clinical reasoning skills will help us understand children better so that we can implement effective interventions. In this way, we provide the opportunities that enhance the child's meaningful participation in daily life.
Esta es otra cosa que yo encuentro